This is Fan Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Mickie Kennedy, president of eReleases, a press release distribution company. And I want to thank you for joining the Fan Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing this morning?
Doing well.
So everyone can see that we have that icon up there. It says listen on Newsly. If you want to check that out, you can use coupon code GHOST. We are a featured podcast on the Newsly network. That's an audio only platform. We also have your URL, www.ereleases.com/plan. And that will be fully clickable on all the platforms that you can listen to or watch us in the actual description that every podcast has. And so, again, one of the things we first ask any guest on the podcast is what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
I think what motivates me is helping small businesses and entrepreneurs. There's a lot of people out there that don't have, $20,000 marketing budgets to spend monthly and things like that. So I like the fact that we can use press releases specifically to help these people get media attention, boost their credibility, and drive traffic and customers to their websites.
That's interesting. So what got you into marketing? Is that something you've always been into? What's the story on that?
No, I finished a writing degree. It was a creative writing degree in poetry, and my career plan was to write poetry and work, waiting tables. And so I did that for a summer after graduating, and I realized that my knees hurt, my back hurt from being on concrete for 10-hour shifts, and I just realized that I wasn't getting any reading or writing done because I was just so drained. And I just said I need one of those safe office jobs. So I applied and
Starving
got
artist doesn't work.
yeah, I got hired at a telecom startup as employee number 3. And because I had writing background, they wanted me to figure out press releases and send them to the media. And so I did that and sent them out through faxes, and we didn't get much attention. And so I took it as a challenge to figure out press releases. We published data, so I'd publish table of the top 10 Caribbean countries telecom traffic to and from the United States, and the media wasn't really interested in that. So there was one country that had more inbound and outbound traffic to the United States than probably all the others combined. It turns out it was the call center for 1-900 numbers at that time. People would call 1-900 numbers for horoscopes or romance tips, every little thing. There was a 1-900 number for it, and most of them were routed through this Caribbean country. And so I did a press release on that, sent it out, and boom, we got picked up in the Financial Times, The Economist, and the Wall Street Journal. And I realized that journalists want a story, and they, data is great, and data can definitely help you get an edge, but you have to kind of explain the data. You have to, pick out the anomalies. Where are the stories here? And point them to those stories. And so I just started doing that with a lot of data that we had, because we had, global data. And all of a sudden, we would get sales from people that were outside the telecom industry, which was new. We only sold to people in the telecom industry before that. And all of a sudden, hedge fund managers, investment groups, a lot of people would just start buying our reports because as we were telling our story, we were sharing incidents where all of a sudden in Latin America, one country was having explosive economic growth, but we had predicted that 3 years ago through little changes in their international telecom traffic. And so these were just little things that we were picking up and sharing, and they were just getting lots of attention, specifically articles written about it. And like I said, we were just generating lots of sales and things like that. Around the same time, I started to get more and more journalists calling and saying, hey, in the future, could you just email the release rather than faxing? And faxing is a chore. So I thought that was great. And I mentioned to my boss, I was like, hey, email is really cool because you could do a big blast and, use a database and stuff. And he's like, yeah, there might be a business there. You should consider it. So I did. I spent about a year contacting journalists, and I launched in October of 1998 with about 10,000 journalists in my database. And I just played matchmaker. I would send releases on behalf of my clients to journalists that I thought would be a good fit. And had really good successes with that. And at some point, PR Newswire, which is the oldest and largest newswire press releases, reached out to us and said, "Hey, you should also consider adding a PR Newswire distribution to your send." And I pointed out that my clients were paying just a few $100s, and they were charging $1,600 to move a 600-word press release. And despite that, they said, maybe we could do a local distribution or a web-only distribution. And I kept giving them the cold shoulder, saying, my customers really want national distribution. And I visited them. We talked. They mentioned that their editorial team is there overnight, a very small team, but they have to be in case there's breaking news or someone needs to get something out to Asia. But the thing was there was many hours of inactivity. And I said, hey, I could schedule all of my releases for the next business day, and therefore you could set them up on the wire overnight and incur no additional labor. And, given that and the fact that I wasn't going to budge, we did come to an agreement. So today, and since then, all of our releases go out nationally through PR Newswire, and you don't have to pay anything close to $1,600. It's a huge savings compared to going directly with them. The caveat is, we can't work with large companies, publicly traded companies, and things like that. We're intended to help small businesses and entrepreneurs and startups that, are not doing the volume that would interest PR Newswire's sales team. And, they don't have the budgets that otherwise would make them a good fit for working directly with the wire.
That's interesting. You kind of, you went into this and it wasn't the end goal, but you found through the data, and that's really interesting how that research it had all these really positive outcomes, and then you kept on digging. So in terms of the writing style for this, though, it seems like there was a lot of data analytics that gave you the impetus to do this. But is the writing style kind of advice? Is there a certain secret sauce to how you pitch it or structure it?
Not really. I mean, if you look up press releases, and we have a lot of examples on our website at eReleases, they're pretty written from an 8th grade level. They're very basic. You're going to take what it is that you're pitching, the newsworthy idea, put that forefront in the headline and in the opening paragraph. You're going to have a great quote, really punch up the quote. So many quotes that we get from people are just weak quotes. They look like they've been written from committee. Many times you can't tell the difference between the quote and the rest of the sentences around it, other than it's written in the first person or the body of the press release is written in the third person. So you really want the quote to sing and be strong, very concise, powerful. A journalist, if they get a mediocre press release, but there's an amazing quote, they feel like they can salvage the story and build the story around the quote. So to really spend some time there. But I used to think that having the best written press release was the most important thing. As a matter of fact, my first book that I wrote was about, beginner's guide to writing powerful press releases. And what I found is a lot of really great, well-written press releases don't do well because the newsworthy idea just wasn't there. And what they picked was, what aligned with them. So you have a new product and you're getting ready to launch it. And, you list the product and a bunch of features and a link to the product where you can learn more or buy it. And that's not a lot for a journalist to work with. And so my second book talks a little bit more about strategic types of ideas for press releases. And I think that's where people can spend more of their time and energy rather than, how well written a release is. So, for example, I talked about that product launch release being just, here's the product and here's features. What are elements that would interest a journalist that you could add to it? And I think the easiest one would be a use case study. Here's a customer that had this problem. They used the product. This was their outcome, ideally with some numbers, and then have a quote by them about how this was such a really good fit for them. So for a journalist looking for a story arc, because journalists are story builders, and a lot of people don't recognize it, that even in smaller articles, they usually have a story arc. And, and the best, the best articles do tell a story. So all of a sudden, having a use case study and their story in there allows you to put yourself in there as the new product and get what you want, which is people to engage with your product and eventually go check you out in a way that's engaging for journalists to share with their audience. Because the journalist's job is largely their gatekeepers trying to decide what content is worthy of sharing with their audience. And so here's a way to sort of put the pill in the cheese for the dog by putting that story, that use case study is the cheese. And the pill is, of course, you want to sell this product. And that makes it palatable and more likely that the journalists will share it with their audience. And so that's where I think people should spend more of their effort and time, is to figure out what the elements of a story are and incorporate those into your announcement.
It also sounds like, being a songwriter, a lot of it is the hook. Like if you when you write the hook, if that can draw the attention the first like 15 seconds somebody hears, like, or it's got to be that beat, that banger kind of thing. The thing that really will get you distinguished is if you can get people to remember it. If you can get people to think about it as a story, because the songwriters, like, the best songs are actually stories. And so if you can get somebody to to believe it and buy into it and actually stay longer than 15 seconds, then you've engaged them. But it seems like the use case is really interesting because just a low information. I'm a business system analyst in my day job, and we use a lot of user stories, use cases. That's our trademark for what we do. It's interesting that you brought that up. When did you start utilizing use cases?
I started realizing, I guess, about 3 years ago that a lot of people were announcing products that were so important to them, and they just didn't understand why the media didn't care, in particular people in their industry. And that's when I started analyzing, because we moved like 10,000 to 12,000 releases a year. I started looking at the releases that were product launches that were successful, and I noticed that the ones that were successful generally shared experiences of people who use their products. And I was just like, I think that's it. I think, I learned this, 25 plus years ago at the telecom company, that, people want stories, and
Mhm.
these product launches have elements that more satisfy that. And so that's when I started circling back and providing education for my clients that they really should go in there and try to incorporate elements of a story. A use case study is great. Other things that people can do in a press release, you don't lead with it, but sometimes sharing your personal story can be a really powerful thing. I think there's a reason that every time someone appears on Shark Tank, they open with what their story was of how the product or business was created, and often it's like sharing a vulnerability or something that
Yeah.
happened that might be inspirational. Like maybe they lost a spouse and they had this hobby and they wondered if they could transform it into a business, or their father used to make grilling things and they wanted to honor him through developing this grill package or whatever. So it's a way to really humanize someone, involve a human interest element, and it does give you immediate empathy, and I think that's really important. And those are also things that you can incorporate in there that make people feel and understand. Sometimes also publishing publicly available data and incorporating that into your announcement. Let's say that you're a business service solution, and you're just sharing how important your service is and trying to get more visibility for it. Maybe showing the stakes of what this solution does. Like maybe you could point out that 67% of people in your industry fail in the first 5 years, often because they haven't solved how to, attract leads to their business. And your product helps to do that in this way and that way. And so things like that are really great. And you can just go out there and get that data and incorporate it into your press release. So it shows the stakes of why your solution is so important.
It's interesting. Again, it's like the humanity of it in an age of AI. I wonder, like, what's the impact of that? Because like everybody's thinking, they say it. Like I just took some AI courses, and all the AI people say, "Oh, it's not going to replace any jobs." Really, like really, because like as a business analyst, if I took 2 hours to do research or 5 hours to do research, and I use a Chat GPT series of prompts, and I get my BRD done in 5 minutes, it looks like that's going to replace bodies.
Right.
So like, they kind of don't, and then they tend to have like stock in the company, or they own a company, and the person telling you that actually
Right.
is in charge of an AI company. So like, really, like, you're not really separate. Like, you're not some academic telling me that you're actually involved in it. But like, do you see it as a potential tool that you use, or a threat, or a combination of everything?
I don't see it as a threat because I think that people still like to have curated content. And I think particularly the media really likes curated content. I think that it gets difficult, looking. I mean, you just go to a news feed at the Wire and, pick, like, I don't know, consumer electronics. There's just so much out there competing. I'm not sure that AI yet knows what people should pick.
What
And
to do with
maybe it's
that?
maybe
Yeah,
it's a little bit of random or whatever, but I think that, journalists have a pretty good indicator of knowing what has to be covered. We always have to write about the Microsofts and Googles of our industry, just because you have to cover it. But when it comes to, new tools and startups and things like that, there's some discretion and curation that takes place. And I don't know that AI is that adept yet to dig in and be able to tell what's interesting and meaningful, compared to, what might just be hyperbole and vaporware or anything like that. So
yeah,
I don't know, but I do think that the writing of a press release can certainly be assisted by AI. I played with a lot. Chat GPT 4.0, for example. I've been very pleased with how it can work writing a press release. What I think that Chat GPT is really bad at, probably is the decision and curation process. It doesn't give you great ideas for writing a press release. So if you ever approach AI to write a press release, know what you want to write about first, and pick
yeah.
a
You got
strategic, newsworthy thing, and then approach it. And some of the things I've done before 4.0 was, give me an ideal structure for a 500 word press release on this subject. And then I would have the AI attack it paragraph by paragraph, because when I let it loose and just say, write a 500 word press release on this topic, what I get is kind of bland. But if I get the AI to slow down and recognize what a good structure is, and then have it fulfill that structure paragraph by paragraph, I get a
yeah,
much better product. And the same thing with the headline and the opening paragraph. I kind of feel like I punish AI, where I go and say, this is an okay headline, but give me 10 different versions of it that are
so you
stronger, more
compare and
powerful, and really lead with, this element. And then I have a lot more to choose from. And then the same thing with the opening paragraph, where I say, this is okay, but can you give me 3 different versions? Quotes.
yeah. It
It
seems like
also
you have to have like if you're having an open chat, you keep on building and giving
Mhm.
it feedback. If you tell it to like think about the holistic conversation, it tends to
Right.
do a better job, because it will actually, and you start keying in on things. And like as a business analyst, the way we try to use it is like if I'm trying to do market comparisons, I might try to get it to give me some data that I might
Right.
not know, right? Or I have an idea. So it will give me that, and then I have it, give me me some like research type information that I might not know. Find all these open sources that tell me things that I might need to assess, but I still make the decision on the
Yes.
assessment, and I still have the spark of the original idea, right? Which it probably won't have if it's a new idea, because it just has
Right.
all the stuff that's gone on before.
Exactly. And then the same thing with the quote. I usually go back and have it redraft several versions of the quote. And I tell it, please write more powerfully, be very concise, really make it, different than the rest of the content. And eventually we get there. Sometimes I have to just rewrite the quote myself, but it's
Yeah.
definitely a tool. At the end of it, I come up with a really good release. Another thing I've done a couple of times, not all the time, is I'll go back in and say, hey, are there any publicly available data points that could reinforce elements of this press release? If
Oh,
so,
yeah.
what is that data point, and where would you suggest putting it in the press release, and what is the sentence you would use? And then I will then consider it. Sometimes,
Wordsmithing,
yeah,
maybe.
sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But I do give it the opportunity for that. I do have to sometimes go out there and verify the data.
The
I guess
data.
I always do, because I just don't
Yeah.
trust it.
Oh,
I have found it will make up data and numbers. I haven't explored whether 4.0 still does that as bad as the previous one, but
mhm.
it is. You have to you can't trust factually everything that's there.
Yeah. Well,
So
you
you
gotta
do want to make
understand that sometimes there's stuff out there that it's well, whatever it's learning on, like, if
right,
somebody puts, like, fake information, it will actually think it's real. It doesn't seem to have the discernment, 'cause
right,
if somebody puts out an article saying that if you eat a rock, it's gonna help you, it'll actually go and use it. You know,
right,
it doesn't have the discernment, and so it's like you have to really can't take the first draft that it gives you back and without, like, doing a double check. And I think the danger is when people just take the first thing that comes back without doing the human work to validate. And that's
right,
like a journalist, like, would need to do that, or somebody that's a professional. You just worry that people like students might not do the rigor that they need to do
right.
because it's like, oh, it gives me a decent answer, so I'm not going to check it.
Right. And
But
I
yeah, in
also think
terms
that's
of
the reason that I find that ChatGPT doesn't write good poetry. There's so much bad poetry on the internet that I think it's been trained on, that you can't get it to save itself. It will insist on rhyming even when you say write free verse, non-rhyming poetry on this subject, and it wants everything to be
the same thing with music.
like a hallmark moment or something, and it's just not really good at it. I've even tried to say, hey, just look at this one particular poet style, and so everything they've written is pretty good, and it's better, but it's not great. So I feel like at least
No,
for now,
it doesn't have
the
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 spark.
right,
It's
the creative
not
the
the
creative
muse. It
element
doesn't
that's
have the
there with
muse.
right, yeah,
I mean, the same thing with music. Like, I tend to use it as a tool. Like, think
mhm,
about it like a recording engineer. Like, a recording engineer has all these plugins and so all these like compressors and all these choices they can use to kind of take that song and run it through effects processing. If you want to have a lot of comparisons of different types of effect processing, that's a really good thing. But I don't want it to actually write the hook based on somebody
right,
else's hook. Because kind of like you run into the issue you had with sampling. Like sampling until they got the legal structure behind it, people were taking things and not really paying the original owner. And same, so in music, it's hard to actually do that today. Like if you take somebody's sample, it will flag a copyright violation if you don't credit it. I think artists are finding that kind of problem with AI right now. Is like they will say it's creating something, and then you'll see somebody's trademark or their signed artist logo or something's on the piece, and it said, "Oh yeah, I created that." Really? Because I see there's this artist's signature on this piece of art. It's like, what's that? It didn't really generate totally original work, even though it's supposed to
yeah,
be, doing generative work. It's not necessarily doing fully generative work, and I think that's you can run into an issue with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the interesting thing you've talked about is like you have this like Rolodex kind of concept of all these journalists that you know, or the that kind of source like of all your distribution network. Um, and how long did you? It's based on what you've been talking about. You built that over the years by kind of just finding what worked in the networks that work. Is that under any kind of threat from automation and bots and are people getting taken out of that process?
So I find that my database is not as useful as it used to be. I think that the real value of e-releases today is the getting the PR Newswire distribution on their Newswire platform. There is still some email distribution that happens, but unfortunately, over the last 25 years, there's been several companies who've developed media databases, and they have all journalists in them, and you could just blast them at will. And as a result, uh, journalists are inundated with the email, most of it
Oh
off
wow, yeah.
because you've got somebody who's selling a product uh, that is meant really for the golf industry. But when they've got the database and they've paid, $15,000, $25,000 for this media database, they just like talk themselves into sending it to everybody
Publish
saying,
it.
"Oh, bankers will buy golf clubs and business professionals. So let's send it to banking and business journalists." And they're like, "Why am I receiving this information about a golf club?" And to you, it made sense because you talked yourself into it because you bought this product for so much money. And there's only like, I don't know, 1,100 golf journalists in there. And you're like, but the database has a couple 100,000 people in it globally. And so, yeah, a lot of off topic stuff happens to the point that a lot of journalists, uh, I- they
Tuning out.
tune out. They hit the spam button left and right. They block people willy nilly. So it has made it a little bit less valuable for having an email address. PR firms are also doing a lot of personalized pitching. Rather than send a press release, you can just pitch a few sentences, maybe a paragraph or two at most, and a great quote that you send them. And for journalists that still have a relationship with someone and he's whitelisted their email and he immediately recognizes them, that's great. And that's probably still good. But I think for a lot of people, email has just become sort of one of these things that it's too much of a good thing. And as a result, I think journalists rely more and more on a newswire. In the US, there's basically a duopoly of newswires. It's PR Newswire that we work with, and the other one is Business Wire. They both do
Mhm.
pretty much the same thing, but we just work with PR Newswire. It's a little bit larger and older, established, but most journalists just look in those two places, and it kind of reinforces the duopoly because there's been a third player trying for a long time to get market share, and it's just harder because
We want to, yeah.
journalist is like, do I really want to jump to a third place to have to look for content? So most of them just look at the two, which is why I feel like it's still a strong duopoly with a third player really trying to make an inroad there. But yeah, when a journalist logs into the newswire, they should receive feeds in the newsrooms. Dot matrix printers would just common just vomit green and white paper continuously. Today it's very customized and individual. They have an individual login at the wire. They can then see the feed of their industry, which is the headlines. They can click through and drill down, and they can also customize their feeds. Like maybe exclude certain press releases that may have certain keywords in it, as well as make sure they capture or hold
Mm.
or pin certain ones that have certain content. So it really is a very valuable tool for them, and I think it's why having access to a newswire is really powerful. There are other types of newswires that people have probably heard, but they're not newswires or press releases, like the AP, Reuters, UPI. There's a couple of others. They work on a different model. Rather than sending a press release over to them, everything that they send to newspapers is written by them, and so they work by writing a story that they believe many of the papers and outlets that use them will be interested in. So it's usually national news, and it's
Mm-hmm.
usually something that if you run a small paper in, say, like Greenville, South Carolina, and there's breaking news overnight, and you're working on the paper for the next morning, it's easier to license that national article from the Associated Press and pay them a fee. They're usually in a licensing arrangement to begin with, and they just take that article as written by the AP and they put it in their
You just
paper.
put it,
Uh,
makes it easier
so
for them to publish,
right,
to actually meet
right.
their schedule and get
Now,
scheduling to
you
publish.
can send press releases to the AP, but they don't transmit the press release. Everything they transmit is written by them, so that they can copyright it, own it, and then be able to
And sell it
license it to
for their
others.
service. Yeah. So I guess when you're dealing with like very like if you're dealing with like authors and small businesses, it's kind of like, are there like micro strategies for like if you have like the macrocosm of the world, and you got these APs and you got these big things, right? And then you got these smaller companies. Like, how do you discern with all these algorithms today? Like, how do you get that to the right target audience? Because you said before, like, you're blasting something out about golf clubs, and you hit it everybody. If you have somebody that's like a science fiction author and they're trying to get their book out, and you want to get it to the readers who actually read science fiction, like, is there some kind of targeting at the beginning that you use? Like, well, here's the target audience, and these are the people, and then you kind of have a micro strategy to know who to actually hit.
Right. So when we send the releases out, the person placing the order gets to select industry categories. We do vet them to make sure that they are on target, and the newswire does as well, because they don't want to be sending golf club press releases to the banking journalists and things like that. So there is some accountability there, but you do have intent with the customer with the categories that they want to target. It's also financially painful to add a bunch of categories. And that's another way to make people sort of focus on the industries that are most applicable. So we have 3 products, and the first one you get to pick 1 category, the second one you pick 2 categories, and the third one you pick 3. You also get some selection of email distribution with the third one. And if you wanted to add additional categories, there's a cost, and again, it has to meet the standard with us that it's appropriate for that. Sometimes it is, but we just have to make sure of that. So that's one thing. And when it's tagged like that on the wire, it does go to these industry specific feeds. It also it gets encoded at the newswire for anything that they feel would be a really good fit for additional targeting or sculpting of the release to different particular people. And so that's largely what happens in that respect as far as the targeting. Now, you mentioned sci-fi authors. I will say fiction is probably not the best fit for
Or
press releases going
what
over a
you're trying
wire.
to do.
Uh, I had one person who did okay with it, but she ended up doing like over a dozen press releases. And she was very prolific. She publishes lots of books, and she did end up getting some media attention. But I'll be honest with you, I think what makes it so difficult for fiction is if you write something that's nonfiction, what you're going to focus on is what you're saying that distinguishes your book from every other book that's been written. And when you're writing fiction, it's very hard to do that. You can talk about the particulars of your story, but your story is either it's going to be something that still fits the framework of many other books that are out there. What generally I think makes fiction successful is the writing style, as well as how the characters are developed and how the story progresses. And those are elements that are just almost very difficult to explain in a press release format without someone reading the book. and
Yeah,
asking a journalist to consider reading an entire book is
it's not
too
gonna
big of an ask. I
happen.
think that most
Yeah,
successful fiction that gets picked up by journalists has been vetted by groups of readers, and most
yeah,
of
beta
those
readers. Yeah, the
journalists
beta
rely
readers, right?
on Goodreads and other communities to say, hey, this is an exceptional piece of science fiction. This is a really great book. And usually that is what then leads to the recognition by people who cover the fiction in particular. That being said, nonfiction authors use press releases all the time and are very successful with it. But I do sort of sympathize with people who are in the fiction space, because I kind of believe it's so difficult to get
Yeah,
picked
it's
up
hard.
and
You have to kind
accepted
of run the
because of
convention. You have to run like the convention circuit. Yeah, it tends to be like look at comic book artists. The comic book artists run the Comic Con circuit. They show up, they get into the underground press. They get a good write up by the readers. You have to have these real micro communities. Like if you're in the indie music scene, you got to get like the indie press to get an underground band. Like I'm a big, I grew up listening to bands like the Replacements who used to do a lot of stuff coming out of CBGBs, and there was this underground buzz and like fanzines of like underground bands that would really do that before they ever got to Rolling Stone, before they ever got to Spin or anything like that. And so in that kind of world, my show initially we just talked to like indie musicians, singer songwriters, and we kind of push. That's where we started. We pushed people that I'd like to listen to, like a DJ, a college radio DJ, pushing stuff. So in terms of that type of content, is that really like does it fit e-releases or does it really fit other types of press or
um,
types of promotion?
I think that those would probably benefit for people who are more working in that industry. And I think that you kind of have to like do, I don't know, do well in the community, uh, be recognized in those places, and then I think you would attract the interest of people to write about you. Maybe at that point, if you had so many good reviews, you had so many people who are kind of known in the industry who talk you up, then maybe you could tie a press release, because all of a sudden it's not just you talking about how great the book is and promoting the book, but might have a blurb from someone who's pretty famous, or
Yeah,
a quote from someone who gave the
famous
book a really
author.
great
Yeah,
review, and all of a sudden you mentioned that despite being self-published, you picked up 241 5-star reviews on Goodreads. All of a sudden, those might be indicators that a journalist would give you a little more attention and consideration.
or a famous actor or director likes your book. Yeah, and then
Yeah,
suddenly you can
yeah.
get like name check somebody and then use that in the headline to kind of trigger something. But you never not that happens every day. Sometimes things happen in the world where somebody big actually recognizes and you kind of name check them. Um, but that's here or there. But just from the world of like online influencers and like social media, um, how does that change like PR from your point of view in terms of what
Right,
you do in the
right. So,
influencers and what they do?
we are fortunate in that influencers, some of them do use press releases. I follow a guy on TikTok called the Snackalator, who each week does a weekly roundup of new snacks hitting grocery shelves, and he also does a separate podcast of new fast food promotions and things that are coming out at fast food places each week. And he often says, "Hey, this product looks great. I'm relying on these press release photos that I'm showing." But I am excited about seeing it when it hits my local Sonic or whatever the place is. So he constantly mentions that he's pulling all this from press releases, which makes sense, because if he was just having to go out and research himself what's coming new, he would probably be publishing stuff after the fact, after it hits the places. But he's got it in advance because he's relying on press releases, and press releases come out, to create a little buzz before the product or launches. So that makes complete sense for him. The same thing with the grocery items. They're hitting the shelves. And again, all of these press releases are coming from, Business Wire and PR and Newswire, the two big places that people check. And and there's a lot of Instagram influencers that have access to PR Newswire's fashion feeds because, the Newswire recognizes that, there are media that are outside of traditional media. And so they're very welcoming of these people who are in different spaces and things like that. There are other places I know that work with finding an influencer and then getting them to pitch your product, and that's paid. I don't get involved in paid at all. I am completely we don't pay for placement. We are trying to get organic earned media. The reason for that is I just feel like it's so much more earnest and recognized as being organic.
Yeah, organic.
And people recognize that. When you get an article written about you, it is like a signal of trust, and it's this third party corroboration. Almost it's like social proof or an implied endorsement when a journalist chooses to write about you, and that credibility is powerful. Usually when people get an article and a mention, they get a ton of sales. And I've had clients say, hey, we got this article and it looks like 350 people clicked through from the article and half of them bought. Is that possible? Because our best landing page is like 6% or something. And I'm like, it is. Not everybody who read the article clicked through or then search from that article to find you. But the people that did, they had that emotional response. They read that article and they had an emotional response to it, which we do with articles that we don't with advertising. We our blinders are up when it's an ad, but when it's an article that someone's written about you, we have that emotional response. I mean, I'm guilty of seeing a blog post or an article of a really cool Kickstarter campaign. I read about this person's journey of trying to find this exact product or solution, and it's so similar to other things, but they're really looking for it to be able to do this. And you're like, yes, I've been there too. And and then you click through and you're like, yes, I'm going to back them. Hopefully I'll get this product. We don't know, but I'm just going to do it. We don't open another window and say, is there something that's close enough that I could live with that's cheaper on Amazon? We just want to back this person. We want to, amplify the energy and everything like that. And I think that that's a way in which, earned media works so well and continues to work well in a world where I think a lot of people have, advertising fatigue and even testimonial fatigue.
A
lot of people,
pharmaceutical ads every 5 seconds, and they kind of get burned out with these jingles. They're like, really? That's the jingle you're going to use? When I just the story of my part is I'm a synth head. I'm a synthesizer guy, and I watch all these YouTubers, and they're always pushing these long form, half hour, 1 hour reviews of tech, and the companies will send Roland and Moog will send it to these YouTubers to see synths before they even come out, and before they're even at the stores, and then there's a buzz. Because you actually see somebody try it, and then as a musician, you get to hear it before you even get to go to a place to actually try it yourself. And there's a lot of stuff in technology where people will be previewing tech. You see it in cars and see it in automobiles, future designs. People can get this big buzz, and through the podcasting or YouTube format, people, influencers, and from podcasters to YouTubers will pitch things. So in terms of that type of marketing, how does that affect what you're doing with eReleases?
Right. So I think that, sometimes when we send out product launches or things like that, people will ask for review copies and things like that. And that does happen. And then people will review it. And that is part of the process. we do caution people to be careful. Mommy bloggers, they generally ask for everything. Every product that's out there, a mommy blogger wants it. And I'm just
Mhm.
like, we see some of these requests come through, and I'm like, this person reviews 3 or 4 products a month. But she's asking for at least 20 or 30 a month that I'm aware of. So, take that what you will. But if it's a good place
With a
and it
grain of
looks like
salt.
it's a good fit, sure, definitely take advantage of that. I think that's a great way to get some, again, you're not paying them. You're hoping for an honest, positive review, but you don't control that. It could come out and they're just like, it's not for me. Here's the cons to it, and here's the things that are good about it. But I don't feel like it really moves the needle in this marketplace.
Mhm. So in terms of entrepreneurs, and what they need to do if they're a startup and they're trying to get the buzz out, and like you've talked about it initially, that it's like the keywords, it's the hook, it's the connection to the right, Rolodex of people that are gonna, you know, put that into the right hands. What's the best, like, maybe top three things you can tell an entrepreneur about getting into, PR?
Right. So I think for an entrepreneur, it is, knowing what your elevator pitch is, what distinguishes you from everybody else. I do find that startups generally do pretty well with PR because they they have the elevator pitch and they know what they do that's different than everybody else. And they can communicate that very effectively and usually at the beginning of something, and that gives you an advantage because a journalist is looking for uniqueness and really understanding what fundamentally makes you a different business than everyone else is going to give them an edge as to like, oh, this is a very interesting take or credible, potentially newsworthy element because they're doing something that's they've carved out something that's a little bit separate from everybody else in the industry, and therefore let's shine a light on it and spotlight them. Um, also, incorporating a little bit about your story. Sometimes you might have to put it later in the press release. There's usually a boilerplate at the end. We call that, it's the about section, where it's say about company. And usually
Mhm.
it's, 4 to 6 sentences. They often get recycled in every press release. You can tweak it over time, but usually it's like your elevator pitch of what you do, what defines you differently, what's meaningful, and you can use it again. Sometimes it could be just a very short a mention of as well of what started in my father-in-law's garage as an experiment to solve this problem for me has morphed into a business that now employs over 200 people, based in a 20,000 foot square foot warehouse, and all of these little cool things, and then yeah, as well as talking about what it is that you do. Um, you know, there are elements that I think will make you stand out. Having a great quote, focusing on an announcement that's meaningful or strategic. Um, I'd mentioned incorporating data points. You can actually create your own data points. Whenever I have a business that tells me they've tried PR in the past and it didn't work, I had someone recently tell me that they spent $40,000 with a PR firm, and they actually didn't have anything negative to say. And I asked them, you know, uh, what was the outcome? And he mentioned that he got a article in the Harvard Business Review. And I'm like, Harvard Business Review doesn't write articles; they accept articles from others. And he goes, well, yeah, the PR firm helped me draft this article, and we submitted it to them, and they accepted it. And I was like, okay. And what else? And he goes, well, they gave me a really cool guy that I interviewed on my podcast. I said, anything else? He goes, no, that was pretty much it. But, I found it a good experience. And I was like, wow, yeah, that's, that's not a lot that they did for you for
For
$40,000.
40,000.
So, if I was a PR firm, I don't know why other people don't do this, but I have in my arsenal of tools and strategic releases one press release that has never failed me. Everybody I've coached through this has gotten, on average, I'd say at least 8 articles written about them, 8 individual articles in 8 different places. The least we've ever had a client get is 4, but we've never had 0. And it's to do a survey in your industry. Now
If
you're
I
going to
don't
author,
want
you're
to
going to
push
author
that
that
for me.
data. And everybody says this sounds like a lot of work, and I will break it down to you. This is the minimal amount of work. You're going to spend your most time coming up with 16 cool questions to ask your industry today that people would want to know. And think back to if you were at a trade show and you were sitting around having drinks with people in your industry. What are the questions you would ask them? Usually these are questions that the trade publications haven't talked about, or things that are going on right now. Like you've noticed that a lot of people in your industry are beginning to slow pay bills. And are you noticing that as well? Or you're tightening up your advertising and marketing budget. You're like, hey, what are you guys doing over the next couple of quarters? These are questions that you can ask in a survey. They could be indicators that capital is consolidating in your industry. You can also ask questions about work culture. We're out of a pandemic. Some people don't want to be back in the office, and they've gone in kicking and screaming. What's your work culture like? Has it been difficult post pandemic to establish a good work culture? With perhaps some people working from home or doing a hybrid or something like that. You can ask left field crazy questions. I usually save those for the end because I break down my 16 questions as 4 questions per page in SurveyMonkey, and on the last page you can ask a little silly question or a left field question. Sometimes those can do really well. We did one for an auto repair shop in Pennsylvania. Can't think of a more non-newsworthy business, but their goal was to get links from automotive trade publications because their website, they lost the domain and now they had a new one and they wanted to get established quick. So the question we asked there on that 4th page was, what's the strangest thing someone left in their car while being repaired? We only got about, I guess, 60, 70 interesting ones. There was a lot of others that just weren't that interesting. But we put together the top 20, put that into a press release, sent it out. It got picked up in over 10 trade publications, several newspapers, including their local newspaper. And, it was something that people really found interesting and intriguing. Like, someone left a boa constrictor.
That's interesting because it's not directly about the business, and I think that's the creative spark that people are missing. Because you talk to an executive, they're just going to want to regurgitate everything about what they do, but they don't have that creativity, like the artist, kind of creative mindset that sometimes in advertising, it's that kind of quirky thing, the thing that nobody thought about, right? To put in there to hook
Right.
people in, where they just are so, it's like they're too close to their product, and they need somebody like yourself to like, oh yeah, we could come at it like this, and then we have a pitch that's actually going to suck people in. It's going to pull them in. It's going to
Sure.
draw attention. That
Right.
seems to
And
be
and this
still the
wasn't
core, the
statistically
core piece.
relevant at all. It was just
Yeah,
fun, quirky things that people wanted to read and share. It was one of
yeah,
a very shareable articles that were created as a result of this. And uh, we included a resource page where we put all of the responses of the questionnaires and all. I think we curated like 60 of these responses, but in the press release we only had 20. But a lot of these places linked to that, which accomplished the goal that we wanted of getting some inbound links from very
that's it.
authoritative sources. And within 60 days, they were ranking number 1 for their city auto repair, which was their goal. And yeah, and they also had these great clippings that they were able to put on their website and share with their audience. And they also got mentioned in the local newspaper. There was an article there, and a lot of people came in and thought it was a really great story. And their big thing was, we're just an auto repair shop in Pennsylvania, Mickie. Should we even be doing a survey? I'm like, there's no rules on this. Whoever is the author of the survey
Yeah.
gets to send it out. and get the accolades that come as a result of it. Now, they didn't know other auto repair shops to send the survey to, and that's another thing we accomplished that's very easy to do is reach out to a small or independent trade association. Every industry has dozens and dozens of trade associations. And I was told by a PR professional that I was doing a podcast with, she goes, well, what would you do in our case, Mickie? There's only Public Relations Society of America, PRSA. And I said, there's over 400 public relations trade associations in the United States. And she didn't believe me. And I immediately pulled up several. Now, many of them aren't going to be applicable. Like one is just, Black women of the South. One is people of the Mid-Atlantic. But there are other ones that are like solopreneurs, solo practices.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can pick something that is aligned with your customer base or you or your audience, and find one that fits. The smaller and independent ones are better because they get no love from the media. The big ones like PRSA doesn't have to worry about media or getting attention. They're not going to cooperate with you. But the small ones, if you approach them and say, hey, I'm doing a survey, would you send this link to your members? In exchange for that, I'll mention you in a press release I'll be issuing over the wire. And 80% of the time that works with the first one you go to. And that's what they did in their case. They belong to an independent auto repair shop association themselves. And they just reached out. They said yes. They sent it out and we got the responses. So it is not daunting or crazy. It's something anyone can do, and it's a great way to get these mentions. And in the case of that guy who spent $40,000, I'm just like, wow, the PR firm could have just done that and got you like probably at least half a dozen articles. And the weirdest thing is that he felt like it was a good experience. And I imagine they do give a very warm, positive experience talking with this person over Zoom because they took $40,000. And so they want them to feel important and showered with praise. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it just seems like you've got a real dynamic and kind of, this seems like common sense. Like you do the research. It's like because you do the legwork, because you've done the analysis, like any kind of good business analyst. Like if you do analysis, data analysis, and then you have a creative spark, kind of left, right brain. And a lot of times some people want one side or the other, but I think it's like it's a combination of like logical thinking and creative thinking and legwork and history, and then like making logical or business decisions that make sense for what you're doing, and tailor making things for what makes sense for that business, and not just having a cookie cutter approach. Like if you go in, you might get that $40,000 thing from a cookie cutter approach, and maybe that worked for this organization, but if they did the work, it's like, that doesn't really work for this other one. So if you just use the same solution all the time, it's like it might work here, but it might not work there. It seems like you do the work to actually know what's going to work for that business.
Right. Yeah, it is about tailoring and being creative, thinking outside the box. And I have a free masterclass that's only an hour long because I'm guilty of buying classes and finding out they're 20 hours long and never doing them. So I created a free masterclass for my customer base to try to get them to do these strategic types of releases like the survey. And I go through several other examples. And it's the link that's on the podcast, eReleases.com/plan. PLAN. And I think that's a great place for anybody to start, because I have a feeling if anybody was to go through that, they would probably brainstorm just going through that at least half a dozen of these strategic types of releases that are more likely to get picked up and, again, engage their creative mind so that they're not doing the same tired press releases we see that don't get media pickup, like the new hire at your company. Very few people care about your new hire unless it's a industry veteran or an executive. And just, save your money. Don't spend money to go over a wire with those types of releases.
I think you've really given a lot of people food for thought. Again, your link, www.ereleases.com/plan, is going to be fully clickable on every place where you can watch the podcast or listen to it in the description. And I want to thank you for being a guest on the Family Like to Ghost podcast on this Sunday morning. It's been really enlightening, and I think you've given people a lot of food for thought, like I said. And I hope that they click on that link and engage with you, because I think they will find that they're going to get results.
You're very welcome. It was great to talk with you and share the importance of basically the opportunities that exist for PR. And a lot of people feel they're too small, or they have imposter syndrome that journalists won't pay attention to them being tiny or small or just starting out. But you got to remember, journalists don't get accolades from their readers for them covering Microsoft or Google. They often get appreciation from their readers when they bring to light and put a spotlight on a new tool or resource or company that's doing something new and different. And often these are mom and pops and solo practitioners and entrepreneurs and startups. And so don't let size be a deterrent to considering PR.
That's awesome. That kind of goes with the emerging and independent voices that we like to talk about, and we've always really tried to champion on this podcast. So I think that's really enlightening to hear that. And I want to thank you again for being a guest on the podcast.
Well, thank you.